Great, thank you all to this first in a series of climate health from the Climate Health Action Group program on the Health and Climate Justice series with our first of the series here looking at empowering youth to create within our communities. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, sorry. So today, oops, sorry, a little too quick there. I'm going to briefly overview the sort of the very high level, very briefly, the problem around the climate impact, the impact of climate change on the world and the impact of the healthcare industry on climate. I'm going to introduce our panelists here who are all active members in the community engaging youth towards mitigating climate change. And then we'll have a question and answer session with our amazing panelists. So, I think we're all very much familiar with from the news stories and from, what we're hearing that the changes in climate that are going on have a major impact on human health. And the rising temperatures and extreme weather, rising sea levels and increasing carbon dioxide levels all have effects on our climate that result in some form or another in impacts into the health of our communities and of the world. And clearly organizations, healthcare organizations across the country and around the world have recognized this and really think that climate change is a health emergency. And it affects all of us, and it especially affects the children in the world, our youth. It has effects on our own community here in Minnesota. And we want to acknowledge that the impact is not equal across our communities, that communities of color, our older adults, children, and low-income communities have greater effects from climate change than others. And so recently the Lancet, who's really has taken on this call to institute change, has said that climate change is the biggest global health threat of the 21st century. Climate change will have its greatest impact on those who are already the poorest in the world and will deepen inequities, and the effects of global warming will shape the future of health among all people. And from a special report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that what we do does have an impact on the climate. That the small levels, I guess small is a relative term, but these changes that appear to be small levels of change in temperature have a huge effect on what happens to our populations and to our communities. So, I think we've been seeing these really need to act now and act in big ways in order to mitigate those effects. Sorry for all of that. And really, anything that we can do to mitigate that increase in temperature can have big effects, again, in improving our communities. And there's something we can do about it. There are a lot of evidence about what we can do as governments, what we can do as industries, corporations, what we can do at an individual level that can all help with this issue. But I think today we really want to, and the series wants to focus, have a big effect also on what we do as healthcare providers and members of the healthcare industry, our effects on climate. So if you were to look at the climate change effect of the US healthcare industry relative to the effect that different countries in the world have, we would be the 13th worst country in terms of emitting greenhouse gases. And if we look at the global healthcare sector, so if you look at around the whole world, an estimated $10 trillion global industry, we would be the 5th largest emitter of, if we were a country listed as a country, the 5th largest emitter on the planet. So we have an amazing, a huge climate footprint. But there's a lot of things we can do. And I think this is the positive thing here to me, is that there's a lot, again, things that we can do from a policy perspective that our government can help us with, our governments can help us with, things that our institution and our climate health action program has engaged mHealth and the university in thinking about some of these things. And certainly, again, as individuals, these are all things that we can all engage in to reduce and mitigate those effects. So today, again, I think, youth have been in many ways the leaders in this call to action and in developing solutions. And so we've invited members of the community here who are involved in youth programs and youth campaigns to give us their perspectives on what can be done, how it's being done, and perhaps, give us some hope for the future. So first, I would like to introduce Dr. or not doctor. I assume you're not a doctor, actually. Maybe you are. Sorry if you are. Shelley K. Foster. She is the program director of YES, Youth Eco Solutions, which works out of the Prairie Woods Environmental Learning Center in Spicer, Minnesota. And the YES program is empowering youth to create solutions to today's ecological challenges. Thank you for joining us, Shelley K. Foster.
Thank you very much for having me here today. I really appreciate that setup. That was really great. And so I'm still seeing your presentation on my screen.
Thank you for letting me know. I appreciate that.
Okay, good. Yes. So thank you for that. Yep. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you here today. And that was a wonderful setup. And I'm really excited to tell you more about my program that I've been working with over the last 10 years called Youth Eco Solutions. And now I am going to share my screen and tell you more about that. Is everybody seeing the screen full screen? Okay, thank you very much. So YES stands for Youth Eco Solutions. YES is a statewide program specific to Minnesota. We have teams in the Northeast, Central, Southern Minnesota, and the Metro. YES is a program of Prairie Woods Environmental Learning Center in partnership with Nye Nature Center. Our mission is to empower youth to create solutions to today's ecological challenges through hands-on projects. And that's really what I'm going to be telling you about today, is the hands-on projects. And Michael, you did a great job of setting up the stage about the different impacts that climate change is having and the change that we need to make. The climate is changing. We also need to change. And that is what really gives me inspiration and hope, is that our youth are the voice. They're making that change. They're making us do better and make changes. They're not going to wait around for us adults to do it. They're doing it themselves, from Greta Thunberg, who's making a global impact, to our students right here in Minnesota. The way that YES starts out is with students will come up with a plan. They'll do it by doing an assessment of their community to find out what's the needs. We really want the students to look at what's going on in their school. Is the school lunch waste being taken care of? Is it being composted? Are the lights on at certain times or not? What are the ways that we can better our community and our environment? They come up with project ideas. They usually come up with way more than we could ever accomplish in 1 year. And then they work towards putting timelines together and accomplishing those goals. And this is all in collaboration with community members. And so really what this does is it makes the students ask questions such as, why are the parking lots lights on at 3 p.m? That's a really big waste. That's really obvious. But that inquiry led to a retrofit of 38 parking lot lights to LED. This is in Atwater, Cosmos Grove City. Another student asked, where does our used motor oil go? Well, after doing some research, the students found out a lot of that motor oil was getting dumped into the ground and into the aquifer. So the solution that they came up with was a drippy use oil site, and that's in collaboration with Eastside Oil. And now that oil is right on the campus, and it's there for the community to use to keep the oil out of the ground and the filters out of our landfills. Another student asked, what can we do to help the monarch butterflies? We all want the monarch butterflies to stay here. And so they partnered with a local expert. We often partner with U of M Extension, Master Gardeners, and they made a plan. And one day they planted this beautiful garden of grasses and seed and flowers. And this happens to be right next to a senior center. And so now this spring, this was planted 3 years ago. So now the harvest is here. We can see that the beautiful flowers are there for the community to enjoy. Now, the hallmark of our program really is that it's youth-led. We don't come in with a prescribed projects. They do that assessment, and then I want to tell you a little bit more about what that leads to, what kind of more projects. This is another project that students did in Mankato West. So by replacing the fluorescent tubes, they are saving 45 tons of CO2 each year, and also saving the school quite a bit of dollars each year. Clean energy. We have a lot of students that are doing projects with solar and wind. This team right here is up in Renshaw, up in Northeast Minnesota. They not only designed this boat, they built it, and then they raced it in a solar regatta that's every year. And this group of students actually won the championship. A new project that we have right now is we're partnering with We Share Solar. And we have a group of students in Royalton, Minnesota, that are putting together a solar suitcase. And this solar suitcase, it actually looks like a suitcase, will get deployed next month to Uganda to a classroom. And these students are also learning about electricity insecurity, something that we don't really worry about so much here in Minnesota. We know that when we come home at night, usually our lights will come on. Well, that's not the case usually in Uganda. So they're learning a lot of the social aspects as well of electricity insecurity and solar. Waste reduction is another piece that students grasp onto and want to make changes. A lot of students, we've gotten them out on the water and doing aquatic invasive species testing, and then those tests go up to the DNR to see if there actually are aquatic invasive species in different bodies of water. Local foods, we have teams that are growing produce, planting trees, and here we have a team that in New London Spicer, they plant and harvest, wash, and put the lettuce onto their lunch every day. It's a greenhouse so that they can do it year round. We bring the students out into the community to see what's going on in their communities, such as compost sites, perhaps a wastewater treatment plant, wind farms, or solar farms. And we love to get the students out, and team building is another really important part of our program. Here is what we call the flying squirrel. So this gal is being hoisted up 20 to 30 feet up in the air by her teammates. Our year ends with a celebration at the Minnesota Twins game, where the students are lifted up for their accomplishments. They'll come from all over the state to be there, and on home plate, the winner of the state award will be announced, and their pictures up on the Jumbotron. So that's another important part of just recognizing the efforts of the youth. Now, this last year, because of climate change, of course, or not because, I'm sorry, because of the pandemic, we had to pivot like everybody else, and we brought our workshops to be virtual. And so we did climate change as our theme, because that's what we heard from the coaches who are the teachers that the students wanted to learn more about. So it really worked out. We'd rather, of course, be in person, but it worked out well that we could really bring different people together and share their expertise with our youth. So what is the impacts of a program like this? We've been in existence for 14 years, and students have completed over 1,300 climate action projects. We've empowered over 4,300 youth, and the program serves over 90 communities annually, because in greater Minnesota, Usually one school will probably support 3 to 5 communities, and volunteers are a huge, huge part of our program. So I wanted to share the voice of the students and the coaches to share the impact. This is from one of our YES coaches. The YES program has been instrumental in teaching my students not only about science, but more importantly, how to be a functioning citizen in a community. I just want to launch into a short story about how important mental health can be. When there's a student that came to this teacher's classroom who had been nonverbal for 2 years, and they started doing the assessment of the school, and they got really excited about doing composting of the school lunch waste. So the student started participating in the meetings. He started leading the meetings, and then they put together a video to promote composting campus-wide. And he was actually one of the lead actors and narrators in the event, in that video. So it really can be a launching pad for students to get engaged, get excited about something that's important to them. I learned the power of what just 5 people can do to make a difference in my community. These are some of the inspiring comments that we get from the students that really keep us going day to day to continue to do the work to support the students. Ways to get involved with us. That's something that we were always looking for professional presenters or to encourage a local school to host a YES team. We're a 501c3, so donations are always welcome. And here's contact information. Now, I'd just like to finish with the voice of a student. YES made me feel I was working to contribute to our environment and trying to make the world a better place. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to more questions during the panel.
Shelley Kay, thank you very much. That was wonderful and amazing work that your program is doing. Just as a quick follow-up before we get to the other presenters, and we'll have the more formal Q&A afterwards. Are you looking for more coaches? Is that an opportunity for people to get involved in?
Yes, yes. Coaches are really the entree into the stronghold of our program. So
awesome,
yes.
Great. Well, and again, we will get to a more formal question and answer period once we've gone through introduced all our presenters. Next, I'd like to introduce Aaron Rosenblum, our MS3, who's 5 days away from being an MS4, so getting there. He is co-chair of the Climate Smart Healthcare, and he's a member of the Medical Students for a Sustainable Future, which is uniting students invested in the health of our planet and patients by providing medical students with tools to make a difference at their institution and in the community. Welcome, Aaron. Tell us about your group and your program.
I'm good. Thanks, Dr. Kim. And thanks, Shelley Kay. That was really interesting to hear about the work that you all are doing. So forgive me too if I'm going to try and be upbeat and energetic, but I was up in the middle of the night last night for a delivery that went well, so I'm just a little bit fatigued. So I'm just going to tell a little bit, say a little bit kind of about my background first, and then some of the work I've been involved in, then kind of some challenges and ways to get involved. So I guess for me, my kind of start in being involved in social issues or activism or advocacy, however you want to say it, didn't start with climate change or environmental work. So when I did my undergraduate education, I got involved in education and pedagogy and organizing around that. So that's kind of my entree into that world. So I really learned about this stuff from an organizing framework. So like meeting with people, doing one-to-ones, trying to build things, trying to grow things. So and always was kind of attracted to that that framework of trying to be building up new things or new alternatives. In that case, the education, thinking primarily about the education system. When I later down the line decided to go to medical school and start medical school, I was kind of searching around for where can I kind of be a presence in terms of my social engagement or advocacy within medicine. And, as Dr. Kim's really set the stage for, climate change is this huge threat to health. Environmental toxicity is this huge threat to health. And so it just seemed like something that I had already cared about, but wasn't super involved in. And it seemed like a great place to sort of transfer that energy. And then, especially in terms of thinking about how do we do no harm? How do we clean up our own house, so to speak, right? If we're 10% of US greenhouse gas emissions, and we know the health consequences of that, we are doing harm, and we need to address that. So it's kind of a little bit about how I got into this. And then kind of starting medical school, it's like searching around to find your people, right? And I think this is really important and probably a really valuable thing about Shelley Kay's program, but really any organizing or advocacy work that you want to engage in is it's hard to do it alone. And it's way easier when you kind of find people or organization or whatever that is engaged, wants to engage with you. So one of the first things I did, was just local at the school and say, why isn't the medical school talking about this? Can we talk about it more? And brought this to the student council. We passed a resolution that went to the dean, and that led to some initial action steps, and also helped me to kind of find some more of who are my people at the university, right? So that was really great. And then sort of in that process, got linked up to some students through at other medical schools. So this was at this point through Practice Green Health, who was really a big player in this space in terms of greening healthcare. And they hooked me up to some of these other students who were starting this national organization, Medical Students for a Sustainable Future. So it's a relatively new group. It really was just forming in 2019, but it's kind of grown exponentially. There's over 400 members now. There's medical students from, I don't know the exact number of schools right now, but schools, multiple dozens of schools in the United States, also in Canada, the UK, Ireland. So really kind of creating that network of like-minded people to share ideas, work on projects together, and so on. So this year I took on the role of the co-chair of the Climate Smart Healthcare Group. So MS4SF has a lot of, because the membership has really exploded, we've also been able to kind of expand the leadership capacity and the capacity to work on different initiatives and projects. So, what I've been focused on with Climate Smart Healthcare is, again, back to the, how do we clean up our own house? What are the barriers? What are some of the tools that are already in existence? And Dr. Kim highlighted again the Practice Green Health and Healthcare Without Harm. They have lots of resources available, right? And they're also identifying what are the gaps, what are the things that we don't have good replacements for or good alternatives for. And then also kind of what are the structural barriers, what are the institutional barriers to doing that. So that's kind of the focus of what our group now is doing. There's 6 of us, I think, on our team, is several fold. So one is just providing toolkits for medical students wherever who want to engage with this work. I do think there's kind of a unique benefit in being a student at an institution, and that you're a paying customer. So they, if you go rabble rousing to the dean, they at least have to acknowledge you, right? Maybe that's a little bit harder to do sometimes, depending on your position as a staff or faculty member, because that's your employer. So trying to empower students at their institutions to do things like this, to bring game plans forward, to make presentations, to know what the options are, to engage in research. So a lot of that work is just around education and kind of building toolkits. Also this year, trying to focus work on environmental justice too. So kind of getting outside the walls of just these healthcare institutions need, that what it means to clean up your own house is just to, make sure the lights turn off when no one's using the room. I mean, yes, that's important and that should be done, but also, a lot of these academic hospitals or large hospitals are in cities, are in environmental justice communities, and their decisions are directly impacting those communities. So I think, to me, part of climate smart healthcare is also what are these institutions doing within the communities that they are located. So that's kind of an important thing for me. Yeah, and then I'll just touch on a little bit too, like MS4SF has been really involved in lots of different advocacy work and have been supportive of advocacy that I've been involved in locally around the Line 3 oil pipeline project, which probably most of the folks on this call have heard about. If not, I know I can share some links afterwards, but it's a new oil pipeline that's been being fiercely resisted, mostly by indigenous-led groups in northern Minnesota. And so trying to organize, in solidarity with them, you leverage the position that we have as future physicians or healthcare provider or other healthcare providers. I think nurses and doctors are one of the two most trusted professions in the country. So it's a little bit because of racism and white supremacy, it's easier for people to write off the indigenous leaders who are leading these movements, and it's important for folks who have kind of access to the halls of power to amplify those voices. And so that's a big part of, I think, part of what MS4SF is doing in terms of the advocacy work, and also, personally what I've been involved in recently in Minnesota. So yeah, so I'll just also add to, I do think, especially as people, again, with a lot of generally people working in the health professions have some economic privilege. So for me, I do think that personal life changes are important. The important thing is to not think that that's all that you have to engage in, that the only thing that matters is that you buy an electric car and then you're absolved, right? You need to be in solidarity with these other movements and trying to engage at a structural and institutional level. But I do think, figuring out, I'm really excited about within the medical world, our residency interviews are going to continue to be virtual. So how many thousands of fewer airplane rides is that going to be? So I do think that those types of choices that we can make are important, right? And also setting that example as people who could afford to go fly anywhere on a whim, what do we choose to do, and what do people see us doing and why? Yeah, so in terms of kind of challenges, I guess I did talk a little bit about just the ability to find your group, find your people. I think that's always important and can be a challenge. I think there's, for a lot of folks who are involved in this type of work, and I'm sure for other young people and students, it's like you always feel like there's more work to do, more that I should be doing, more that I could be doing, and it's really easy to just get frustrated and burn out and be really hard on yourself. And I think part of that, again, is having that group to kind of lift you up and also to carry some of the load and feel like it isn't all on your shoulders. And then also just being really forgiving and being in this for the forgiving with yourself and being in it for the long haul is something that I'm trying to take in. At the same time, something I'm thinking a lot about, again, going back to this kind of privileged position that I'm finding myself in as a, my upbringing has had a lot of privilege, but also getting into this career and this very professional career is sort of what level of risk do we accept or take in this movement? So when I talked again about the indigenous leaders up north, risking arrest, getting arrested for nonviolent civil disobedience, trying to stop this massive fossil fuel infrastructure. And then, most of the people who are getting arrested in those actions are young people. And I think, they have less to lose, at least in that sort of framework. And so that's just something that I'm thinking about as a challenge and trying to, I do think there's a history of professionals and even doctors, engaging and other health professionals engaging in nonviolent civil disobedience. That's just something that I'm thinking about as a challenge. Yeah, and then ways to get involved. I guess if you have any questions about supporting MS4SF, we actually are going to start doing some fundraising to try and help support some of the initiatives. So I'll drop my email in the chat when I'm done talking, and you can feel free to shoot me an email about that. If you're a healthcare professional, definitely, if you're not already looped into Healthcare Without Harm, the medical consortium for, I'm forgetting that whole name. I'll figure it out and I'll drop it in the chat too. But looping into those organizations that are going to provide some of that support. And yes, thanks Jessica for posting that. And if you're looking for something in the near term, there is the Clean Med conference coming up May 18th through 20th, which is going to be online, which will be really focused on kind of concrete solutions within the healthcare space. There will be one of the founders of MS4SF is going to be speaking there, and you'll hear from some other MS4SF members. I do think I can drop it in the link too, but something you could do today is that for Earth Day, one of our members created sort of this self-assessment survey around knowledge around climate and health. So it's a kind of a way to get some data on where people are at, but also do some learning. It takes 5 or 10 minutes. So I'll drop that link, or someone will drop that link. And if you just wanted to fill that out and share that with your colleagues, that would be awesome too. And that's what I've got. Thank you.
And Aaron, if you need help connecting with the University of Minnesota Foundation in terms of the fundraising, please let me know and I can help facilitate that if you haven't already.
Yeah, I've connected with them on other things, but
okay, great. And somewhere in all of that, you're finding time also to learn how to be a doctor, which is awesome, amazing, great.
That's most of what I'm trying to do.
So our final panelist is Akila Sanders-Reed from PowerShift Network. She is the oil-free organizer for that institution. That is a national network of young people through organizations of young people that create campaigns that support youth organizations to mitigate climate change and create a just, clean, energy future and resilient and thriving communities for us all. Akila?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, my name is Akila. I use she, her pronouns, and just so much thanks to everybody for pulling this panel together, and to Shelley Kay and Aaron for what you shared. And especially just, in the midst of the year that we've had, I feel really honored to be here with all of you who have been on the front lines of multiple simultaneous crises for the last year and then some. So I live in South Minneapolis, but I grew up in New Mexico, where water is central to conversations because of its scarcity rather than its abundance. I'm still shocked, despite having lived here for almost a decade at this point, when I drive around northern Minnesota and I look out the window and I go, there's another pond, there's another lake, because the desert really makes it blindingly clear how reliant we are on the local land and water around us. And I think growing up there was really foundational to my understanding of what climate change means for us as people and as communities, and the ways that that's already wreaking havoc on people's lives. From my neighbor's well running dry to the communities that just don't have water. You can't drill deep enough to find it, and where folks can't live in the communities that they love and call home. And I know Shelley Kay mentioned energy security, and I think about some of the situations we see even out in California. So far we've mostly seen catastrophic wildfires more on the West Coast, but that was a fear that I grew up with. And we see as some of the impacts from that, in desert places like California. And I imagine it's only a matter of time until I see them in my home state, these like rolling blackouts and some of the ways that our energy infrastructure is beginning to fail us because of the ways that it was built on fossil fuels. So just thinking about some of those pieces are, just right in front of your nose in a desert, and in a community like that. And so I got involved in climate justice work as a high school student there, which was now over 10 years ago. I'm 27, so I'm a less youthy youth than I was at that time. But I feel like I was really part of the generation that grew up being told to solve the climate crisis in kind of the same tone of voice that we were told to do the dishes or pick up our toys. And at some point along the line, I think most of us realized that just changing out our light bulbs wasn't going to meet the crisis at the scale that we needed to. So I eventually moved to Minnesota for college, in part because the Twin Cities and Minnesota as a whole seemed like the kind of down-to-earth mid-sized metro area with good rural context that seemed like it could really be a model for climate action. And the organizing here, certainly what Shelley Kay and Aaron and so many other folks have been talking about, has national renown. I think we really do have what it takes, but we've got this nasty pipeline problem that Aaron alluded to. Northern Minnesota is a super highway for some of the dirtiest oil on earth. The Canadian tar sands, there's 6 to 7 pipelines, depending where along Enbridge's route you're looking in northern Minnesota, that are already there pumping that 24/7. And so I got involved initially in organizing around Keystone XL, which would have obviously not run through Minnesota, but kind of through the Great Plains states. And then later involved in organizing around Enbridge's lines, because opposing these projects felt like one of the most direct and tangible ways of taking on the crisis at the scale that we need to. And one of the ways that I've been involved in fighting Enbridge's Line 3 pipeline has been, and I should say, I'll back up. Aaron gave a good intro to Line 3, but it's really one of the last 2 major proposed tar sands export lines on the continent. President Biden canceled Keystone XL in his first few days in office. And so Line 3 and then the Trans Mountain pipeline up in Canada are really the last 2 like lifelines for this dying industry with these really, really dirty fossil fuels, the Canadian tar sands. So if Line 3 was constructed, it would have the climate impact equivalent to 50 coal-fired power plants. So that's kind of the scale of the problem that we're looking at here. And one of the ways I've been involved in fighting that pipeline has been by helping coordinate a group called the Youth Climate Interveners. And the Youth Climate Interveners were a group of young people, 13 of us originally, who came together in 2017 to get really involved in the regulatory process around Line 3, because we felt that young folks deserved a seat at the table based on the massive impact that building Line 3 would have on our lives. And so the way that these regulatory processes here in Minnesota work is that usually, a whole bunch of groups like the Sierra Club, Enbridge, folks on both sides lawyer up, and they go into a big regulatory process where they bring expert witnesses and they cross-examine each other's experts in front of a judge. And go through this whole process to kind of duke out what is true and what isn't, and what are the impacts going to be, and kind of find the facts of the case, as it were. And so the standard that either a person or a group has to meet in order to be a part of that process is proving that you or the people you represent will be directly and uniquely impacted by the situation, by the decision being made. And one example that we learned from in this was a group of landowners in South Dakota who intervened on the Keystone XL pipeline because they said, hey, I can represent my own interests, and putting this pipeline across my land is going to pretty directly and uniquely impact me. So we took a page out of their book and decided we wanted to intervene in this particular case, and to do that without a lawyer, because we felt like as young folks, we were the best advocates for our own interests. And so we went before a judge. We brought our stories of how climate change was going to directly and uniquely impact us. And a lot of those were related to health, mental health, physical health, community health, and successfully convinced the judge that we should be allowed into the process. We won that standing. And that allowed us to continue to bring those stories from our own communities, and also to bring in expert witnesses. So going back to a little bit about what Aaron was saying about how white supremacy really conditions us not to respect different kinds of wisdom, to only respect things that are really, really institutionalized. We wanted to really push back against that, not only with our own presence being there as a form of resistance in and of itself, but in the experts that we brought. So we brought a variety of climate experts. We brought Indigenous elders to bring their wisdom. And some of our experts included folks like Dr. Bruce Snyder, who's a member of Health Professionals for Healthy Climate, to talk about if we build this, there'll be a clear climate impact. And the result of that, the human impacts of that, of building this pipeline, are going to look like these particular health impacts here in Minnesota. We also had psychologist, Dr. Christy Manning, who talked about the mental health impacts, which I know we touched on here as well. You know, I feel like this has already been mentioned, but just to underscore the obvious, health is really a place where, you know, the fact that, as one of my mentors says, climate is a threat multiplier is really apparent. Going back to the idea of environmental justice, communities that are already under threat from racism, from poverty, from homophobia, from broken treaties, all of those things are under additional threat because of climate change. And so that was part of what we were highlighting through our own testimony and the expert witnesses. And we found through that process that, you know, decision makers who had to listen to everyday people, who had to listen to us talk about our lived experiences and our fears, and especially who had to listen to the testimony of you know, Indigenous youth and Indigenous folks from up north talking about the impacts of this pipeline. You know, the more they listened to us, the more opposed to the project they became. And unfortunately, the decision makers who ultimately kind of had the full say over this project, the Public Utilities Commission here in Minnesota, was really insulated from most of that process. So they didn't hear any of the public hearings. We were some of the only members of the public who got to speak to them before they made their decision. And so they did end up approving it, which is why we're now seeing the resistance up north on the ground. And there's many lawsuits still playing out against the project. We expect to see some decisions on those by sometime in early June. The youth climate interveners remain involved in that. So anyway, I'll wrap up. I realize I'm at the end of my time here, just by saying that I do this work, as was mentioned, as part of an organization called the Power Shift Network, which is a Black women-led network of more than 90 member groups supporting young folks organizing for climate justice. And I love that work because I see it as facilitating young people to have autonomous access to the resources and connections that they need in order to do their best work. And, you know, as much as I love these climate interveners, I think one thing that's important to me to always remind folks is that there's nothing particularly special about us. I say that not just to be humble, but because it feels important to remind us that, you know, everyday young folks all over and everyday people in our communities inherently have the wisdom and the ingenuity and the firsthand knowledge, you know, to do the deeply revolutionary work that we need in order to win, especially when we have an intergenerational movement backing each other up. So, you know, I'll wrap up there and make sure that we've still got some time for questions here.
Thank you, Kelly. That was wonderful. Thanks for sharing. I can just briefly, you know, listening to the three of you and the work you all are doing, you know, what the threads that I'm hearing that through all three of your conversations is that, first of all, we all can have an impact. We can also all be part of the problem if we're not really working at it. But there's a community out there to work with. Partnerships are important, and you know, there's a lot we can do to really make an effect. So I love that we're seeing three different perhaps levels and three different perspectives of that through the three of you here. So again, for people who want to ask a question to the panel, whether you want to address it individually to one of the panelists, if so, please include that into your question. Or if you want to open question to the panel, please use the question and answer section of the meeting. And not seeing any questions at the moment. I think Jessica, thank you so much for answering some of the sidebar questions that have been going on. That's awesome. Highlighting what these organizations have been doing. But you know, perhaps I can throw out to you and maybe we can start with Shelley K. You know, working with young people is obviously very exciting, and you know, keeps us on our toes and always have great ideas. But sometimes, you know, it might butt up against what we see in the real world. Do you see any? How do you navigate that or reconcile the work that you're doing with the work you're doing educating with what you see in the real world?
Right, that is hard. Like you listed all those, the climate crisis that we're in right now, that is hard. And I believe our youth are feeling that tension, they're feeling that stress. And so that is why it's important work to see that they know, like Akila said, that this has been put on their plate as something. I like what you said about like take out the garbage, you know, you got to solve the climate crisis. You know, it's really unfair for us to be throwing that at them. But at the same time, they're grabbing it, they're taking the responsibility, and they're taking action. So I think it's a balance. And also, you know, we have to we always encourage the students to do a project that's like a lightning project, something they can accomplish, like cell phone collection or Christmas tree lights collection, and then look at the longer term project, something that maybe they're going to do that pollinator garden in the spring, or maybe they're going to try and get solar on their school. So try and take it in steps. And I think that's a good lesson for all of us too, because it can be overwhelming for each of us. We try and do everything that we're supposed to be doing. So taking a few things and doing them well and continue to expand on that.
Erin, maybe I'll throw the same question at you. Where do you see, you know, in terms of the groups that you're working with, helping them accomplish goals and be productive?
Mm-hmm. I guess in terms of like, I don't count myself exactly as a young person anymore, but as a student, let's say, interacting with institutions, and I do think probably for younger people interacting with institutions too, we recognize the gap between words and actions, right? It's glaringly apparent. So I think just checking it as leaders or members in institutions, you know, checking in about what are we saying, and is what we're doing matching what we're saying. I know that's personally something I'm always trying to reflect on, and I think it's one of the biggest kind of disconnects and frustrations, you know, personally, as I'm trying to do this work.
Nikila, I think you said 90 organizations across the country. Not only, so, you know, aligning 90 organizations, I'm sure is a massive undertaking task, but where you see how are you able to be effective in putting the youth in their, you know, how organizing them and getting them moving towards a common goal?
Yeah. You know, I think the Power Shift Network is, yeah, as you said, it's all across the country and some of the U.S. territories. And one of the things that feels really important to me in the way that I think about what success looks like is thinking about our movement and our world like an ecosystem. And that if everybody was doing the exact same thing, if all we had was pine trees, we wouldn't really have a functional ecosystem. We need the mushrooms and the squirrels and all of the other different pieces of that ecosystem in order to be successful. And so when I think about the value of having a big network of 90 different groups that are all supporting each other and centering the wisdom of young people, part of that is about providing young people with access to the different kinds of resources that they might need. So whether that's wisdom, whether that's skills, whether that's mentorship or finances or like material support, you know, connecting them with those resources, and then also giving folks a sense of the landscape that, you know, I'm over here fighting line 3. And I know that, you know, just even on this call, right, we've got folks who are intervening and you know, breaking the systems around motor oil. We've got folks who are doing the work around health. We've got folks, you know, who are handling these other things that I would be terrible at. So thinking about each of us finding, you know, what are our gifts in the movement? What are our skills? And then knowing where to find each other. So knowing that when I have questions about energy democracy, when I'm watching what's happening out in California and thinking, wow, we need a better system, I can call some of the other folks within the Power Shift Network and say, hey, what are y'all working on? How can I lift that up? Or when I'm, you know, hearing folks saying, oh, well, we're going to need this tar sands oil, you know, to fuel our cars forever, which is not true. But, you know, when we're thinking about like, what does the next few steps of moving away from that look, I can call the folks who are working on equitable transportation. And I know that they've got my back and I've got their back. And so I think that's a big part of why I really appreciate kind of this network structure where we're not all necessarily doing the same thing. And sometimes, you know, there is a space there for having movement conversations about where maybe we're running it at cross sections to each other because we haven't thought about things. We haven't thought about how this thing that looks like a solution might actually have a really, really negative impact for this community or things like that. It helps us all be more aware. So that's really the value that I see in having a big network like that, where there's intergenerational wisdom that's backing up the kind of the inspiration and ingenuity of young folks. And there's also the ability to look around and see who's handling what else and how your work can complement each other.
That's awesome. A huge database of all the things that are going on. I'm sure is very exciting. Aaron, I might start this next question to you because it is in thinking about health professionals and what they need to know. So what are the skills that we need to develop or harness as health professionals to be able to do the work with the frontline communities effectively?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm still learning. Um,
Yes.
I think actually like one of the skills that you as and the other faculty try and teach us, in the clinic is really active and careful listening. And I think that's probably also at the core of being able to do the work of supporting frontline communities. And so I think maybe we've gotten better at teaching ourselves or each other to do that in a one-to-one interaction in the clinic. That maybe feels a little bit easier. But we're also used to being the experts. And so coming in with a research idea or a project that we want to do, or we got some grant funding for X, Y, or Z. And I think it means kind of prioritizing, having the conversations and the listening before, you don't put the cart before the horse, kind of. And then having the follow through, right? So communities are going to be less trusting and willing, and probably already are less trusting, but less willing to trust and engage in the future if it's always parachuting in with some grant funding, and then as soon as that dries up, you're gone, or the next grant cycle, incentivizes some other project or collaboration. And so I think that's kind of a bit of a deficit in what I've seen, in terms of how the tendency of how we operate.
They're reflecting on my work in global health, that we don't want to be health tourists. We want to actually invest in where we're and leave sustainable commitments.
Yeah.
Akila, maybe thoughts about that as you listen to Aaron and maybe think about this. What would your advice be to healthcare professionals in terms of what they can do and what skills they need to develop to help communities?
Oh, that feels like a big question, and I appreciate Aaron kicking us off there, because I am so deeply not a health professional, and I have so much respect for everybody here who is, and have just been really grateful to get to work with some of the folks on this call in other contexts. And so I think definitely the listening piece is really important, and I think kind of across the board, starting to unpack why institutionally we see different kinds of wisdom as valuable. Again, I go back to my experience with these climate interveners and how, this group of young people kind of, broke into this system that was really definitely not meant for us. And we're able to suddenly have a public sense of legitimacy that we didn't have otherwise. And nothing had fundamentally changed about us. When we went before that judge and said, you need to listen to us, and here's why, we didn't suddenly get a new degree. We didn't suddenly get an extra brain. We did, we were still the same young people who'd been out in the streets the day before. And similarly with the expert witnesses that we brought, nothing fundamentally changed about who they were or what they knew when we brought them into that room. But suddenly they had a platform and they had a lot more legitimacy in the eyes of the judge and the other decision makers. And so when I think about, what the medical, field, just going off of, I think, some of what maybe Aaron was alluding to, is just, thinking about why different kinds of wisdom and why different kinds of knowledge are seen as legitimate and why others are kind of brushed aside, especially in the context of thinking about line 3. And I think the other piece, my very different field here, but my college roommate was a physics major, and we had a lot of really long and in-depth conversations about whose role is it really to figure out the solutions? I'm sitting over here as an organizer, and she was sitting over there as a physicist, involved in renewable energies, and trying to figure out well, if it's not the scientist's job to figure out what we're supposed to do about the problem, and it's I'm sick of having to come up with that. I want to be able to organize my community to take care of ourselves. eventually realized the answer is mostly our decision makers, but they've kind of abdicated that responsibility in a lot of ways and kicked the can down the road for far too long on climate. So figuring out how to kind of meet in the middle there and realize that there, that there is a role for advocacy that doesn't have to be separate from, the scientific and the field that folks are in, and I think that's, I'm extrapolating to the medical field here, obviously, but thinking about, some of the ways in which like having expert witnesses like Dr. Snyder and Dr. Manning, who are able to come in and say like, I know the science, like I know, I have a PhD in this, and I can tell you that these problems are real, and to validate what people are seeing in their communities. I think that, that piece of advocacy and thinking about like, what does it look like to do that in a way, and to do work of any kind, whether that's, being a medical professional or being an author or being an engineer in alignment with climate justice values is what this moment calls on us for. Everybody who's alive on the planet today has got to be part of solving this, because that's the timeline we're on. It can't just be the next generation. It can't, I've heard so many folks who looked at me and said, oh, we're doing this for your generation, 10 years ago. Now tell people who are 10 or 15 years younger than me, oh, we're doing this for your generation. And, we don't get that kind of indefinite punt on climate change. And so just thinking about everybody who's here in this moment has the responsibility and the gift to get to actualize what solving this looks like. So to think about how to do that.
That's awesome. I think, my perspective on healthcare, that's a big challenge because, we spend so long training and we specialize so much. We have relatively rigid hierarchies and we're very slow to change. But, I think there are a lot of us who are, thinking about that, and hopefully, we do get involved in that shared responsibility. Shelley Kay, thoughts about how healthcare professionals can learn skills to?
Yes. Well, when I was thinking about this question a little bit, I was thinking of Richard Lou's book, Into the Woods. He talks about the nature deficit disorder. Now, that's not like a proper like diagnosis, but it is a real concept, a real thing. So I think just encouraging to get outside and making that the normal acts that you do. And I think that's one of the, maybe if there is any silver lining from the pandemic, is families are getting outside. People are, the parks are, really flooded right now with people, and you can't buy rollerblades and because people are, getting outside and doing that. So I just think that the more we can connect youth, our children to nature, the more that they're going to then want to care for it.
Awesome. Yeah. And then how maybe as we're coming out of the pandemic, we can engage communities, and then not just individuals. Yeah.
Right. The whole communities, and just, looking at, there's just so much research showing the health improvements that come from being outside. Even just going barefoot in the grass is a huge health benefit.
Thank you. Erin, I might go back to you because I think you actually raised, said you were thinking maybe perhaps about this question, that when you first came into medical school, no one was talking about addressing climate change. So if you could write the syllabus, if you could be the thread director for climate change for the medical school, what would you add to the curriculum?
Yeah, just to clarify too, it isn't that nobody was talking about climate change. To give credit to all the folks who were.
We'll honor the perspective that you had, that you didn't feel like
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess in terms of curricular change specifically, I think there are multiple opportunities to weave health effects of climate change into the sort of preclinical curriculum. So, basic sciences, physiology, body systems. How does heat affect the cardiovascular system? How do vector-borne illnesses change with climate change? Talking about that in microbiology and infectious diseases. Talking about mental health effects, in psychiatry, especially among young people, as Akila was talking about. In terms of the stress and anxiety and other mental health effects. So I think the idea would definitely be threading a lot of that content, through the existing curriculum, so that future health providers are empowered to talk about those things competently and clearly, and also to address them with their patients, in terms of, avoiding issues like heat stroke or the potential for increased likelihood of asthma exacerbation in certain conditions. So there's that, and then I do also think I'd like to have some more dedicated curriculum, in terms of, not just climate change and environmental health, but in terms of sort of public health and social determinants of health in general. So I think we're starting to especially after the murder of George Floyd, there was a realization that there needed to be more of that work in terms of race and racial justice. And I think this climate justice is deeply interconnected with that too. So just having more, dedicated content to getting into the why and why do these issues exist, and how can you work to address them outside of the clinic as well. So, and then I'd love to see beyond the curriculum too, the institution make, more and more sustained commitments, not just with their students, but with the community.
Great, thank you. Shelley K, I thought maybe you could answer this question, but maybe in the perspective of would be high schools the appropriate venue if you could change or add to the curriculum of the high schools? What would you have our young people across Minnesota learn about?
Oh, there's a lot of things I'd love them to learn, but mainly I think to, just to understand climate change a little bit more. I think there's I think that term is thrown out there a lot, but I don't know that our youth really understands what it is, because it is complex, and then how it's going to affect them. And then to give them that opportunity to do the hands-on projects, like we talked about. But I think it's really important for them to understand climate change and to understand that they didn't necessarily, they're part of the cause of it, but they're not alone in the solutions either. So I think having it be part of the curriculum to understand climate change. And I know that Climate Generation has put together curriculum, so it's out there, but I think there's still, like in greater Minnesota, there's still resistance. I don't want to target just them, but in pockets, there's still resistance that climate change is even real, which is kind of maybe hard to believe that, but that is very real. So just making it more of the norm, and so that our behaviors become part of the norm. Like, kind of come back to, like, my mother grew up in the Depression. So, a lot of these behaviors that we are learning are things that they lived with every day. We're relearning a lot of these behaviors from the past. So, a lot of this stuff isn't all that new. So I think just so that it becomes part of our norm. You talked about Dr. Christy Manning, and I know that she's advocates for that too. What's the norm that a new norm? And I think that starts with educating our youth, not even in high school, but at the elementary level as well.
Great. Nikila, maybe from the perspective of youth organizations, and perhaps your Power Network already has a curriculum they teach, but what are the things that you would want youth organizations to know about?
Yeah, great question. And we actually just 2 days ago wrapped up a 10-day convergence called PowerShift 2021. That's a convergence we've held various years, obviously not always 2021, every couple of years, bringing together, hundreds to thousands of young people for a couple days of, political education and hard skills training and things like that. So definitely top of mind at the moment. And I think a lot of thinking about both like the medical question here and also the kind of the political education is going back to this idea of climate change as a threat multiplier. So thinking about, folks who who, again, in the medical context are like hesitant to engage with the medical field, or, folks who are facing other kinds of oppression, whether that's trans folks or Black folks or Indigenous women, or, all of the other, groups of folks. I've recently been learning a lot more about disability justice, which feels like a huge blind spot for the climate movement. Especially in the ways in which, so many of the climate disasters that we see specifically target and kill, disabled folks and also cause, disability. And so thinking about some of those different pieces about how, both climate change as a threat multiplier has felt really important. I feel like there's been a lot that we've been digging into around that. And also going off of a little bit of what Shelley Kay was saying, just that the solutions are also, embedded in both the recent and ancestral like wisdom that folks have, the lived experiences that folks have, that the solutions to the climate crisis are held by Indigenous women and Black women and folks who know how to live sustainably and who have been figuring out all of these solutions, I think long before a lot of other folks who woke up to them through the climate crisis, because they are the solutions to so many other forms of oppression, because they are the solutions that folks, in poverty and folks targeted by racism have had to come up with for so long. So I think two of the key themes, that we were really digging into over the course of our convergence were grounding in, political education and movement history. What has caused change in the past? Where have we found solutions? And what are the wisdom that we need in order to win now? And then also, again, looking at the ways in which climate change is a threat multiplier, and how those common solutions, because climate change is just a symptom, right? Like climate change, like COVID, like so many other things, are a symptom of the ways that we have built the world around us, in the last couple hundred years. And so, really seeing those solutions and the healing that needs to happen there, as addressing all of those different pieces.
Thank you. Just checking to see if there's any other, I think, Beth, thank you for highlighting the work that the Penny George Institute has done. Thank you for all of you doing. Some of you are having to leave, and certainly if you need to leave, we're so happy that you could join us for at least, part of this. Maybe just, I think some of you touched a little bit on this. And maybe this might be a good way to finish off, but what did we learn during the COVID pandemic and our response to the COVID pandemic that we can take forward in terms of dealing with climate change or mitigating climate change? Keela, maybe do you want to start with that one?
Sure. I feel like the two of the takeaways I have are, one, that, that no one is coming to save us. That mutual aid and having each other's backs and like really digging into sharing what we have and meeting our community where we're at and like building those solutions ourselves is a huge part of what's going to get us out of this, right? Like the state and nobody else is coming to save us. We need to push those folks to like do the bare minimum here. Obviously, I spend a lot of time advocating for our decision makers to do a heck of a lot better than they're doing right now. But that really, we have what we need at the community level, and it's important to build those relationships and rely on that, especially in times of crisis. And I think also that the solutions do also need to be systemic, right? Like we saw folks, not driving, not flying, not doing so much of what we're usually told, especially by big corporations, are the things that we need to do to solve the climate crisis. And lo and behold, the climate crisis kept rolling. So, I think thinking about the fact that we really do need to be tackling some of the systemic pieces of the climate crisis. We need to be moving away from fossil fuels and not just shifting that into, producing plastics and things like that we actually need to be making some of those big system scale changes is really important. So I think those are two of the things that the pandemic really highlighted to me. And again, I've said it before, but the ways the pandemic also was a threat multiplier to so many different communities.
Great, thank you. Shelley Kay, I think you already mentioned, your ability to, through the virtual network, reach a lot of people. Other thoughts about what you learned from the COVID pandemic that you can take forward?
Right, I think we all learned that we are very resilient and our students are resilient. They've been put through a lot right now, whatever age group that they are. They were studying from home, and I think just the stress that it put on parents. So I just think that just to rethink maybe just the whole family structure too, and how we support each other, and to support those students. It was very stressful, but I think they came out okay. Everybody is very resilient. We all pivoted, did what we needed to do. So maybe we just have to look at how can we work differently. I like what you're saying, Akila, too, about like not flying as much. I mean, corporations learned that they could save money by having, people work from home. So maybe we're all going to learn to work a little bit differently, take some of the positive things that we gained just by being able to do things virtually, so that we aren't traveling as much, and then add to that what we're already doing and bring in the in-person as well. So I think we all have changed and grown, and hopefully we'll be better off for it in the long run.
Great, thank you. And speaking of strong, resilient students, Aaron, thought you want to take that question? What did we learn from the COVID pandemic and response to the COVID pandemic that we can take forward in a positive way?
Sure. I guess two things that I'll pull out. One is kind of it was like a stress test for our social structure and economic structure. And I think we saw a lot of the weak points. We're still seeing the weak points. I'm worried about, for example, what's going to happen when eviction moratoriums are lifted. So I think this was an opportunity to see what some of those weak points were, so that we can address them. I also think it highlighted our ability to make rapid change when we felt like the fire was right beneath our feet. So I think we have great capacity, and it's about somehow lighting the fire about some of these issues, before, we're literally getting, run from our homes with a wildfire or something like that. So
even an institution as deeply entrenched as a medical school can make rapid changes.
yeah.
Great. Well, I want to first thank our support group here. First of all, Dr. Lalitha Surapanini. She's been amazing. She is the lead of our director of our health program, climate action program, and is really the brain trust and the main motivator behind all this. And so wanted to thank her. Thanks definitely Jessica for helping out get this panel ready, and also for doing all the background work with this discussion, and the many other members of CHAP who helped put this together and get it going. But big thanks to our panelists, Shelley K. Foster, Aaron Rosenblum, and Akila Sanders-Reed. Thank you so much for your wonderful perspectives, the work that you're doing with the communities, and we look forward to the productive work that you'll be doing in the future.
Thank you. It was an honor, and it was great to be here. And thank you to all the healthcare professionals for all the hard work you have done this past year and continue to do to get us through this pandemic.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a great day. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.